The Last Prayer of Christmas Eve, a Miss Marple mystery. Welcome to Detective Notebook, a quiet place where stories drift gently into your imagination, and every tale carries a hint of wonder. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Perhaps by a softly glowing fire or tucked under a blanket with a warm cup of tea? I love imagining the corners of the world where this little mystery finds its listeners. Picture this. St. Mary Mead lies under a blanket of fresh snow, lanterns glowing through frosted windows, and the scent of pine drifting from every hearth. Church bells toll softly in the distance as villagers gather for the final Christmas Eve service. All seems serene, the very picture of holiday calm, until Miss Marple notices a single candle burning in a darkened pew, though no one has been near it. Who lit that candle, and why hasn't it gone out? What secret waits silently among the shadows of the chapel? If you enjoy calm, clever mysteries, subscribe and join the Detective Notebook family. Now settle in by the fire, and let's step quietly into tonight's mystery. Chapter 1. Shadows Among the Carolers. The Inn of St. Mary, Mead, was alive with the gentle hum of festive cheer, its low ceilings and polished oak beams glowing warmly under the soft light of lanterns and a crackling fireplace. The scent of mulled wine mingled with the delicate aroma of pine boughs, and the clink of glasses punctuated the quiet laughter of villagers gathering for their traditional Christmas Eve celebration. Miss Marple, tucked into a corner by a window, allowed herself a small, satisfied smile as she took in the scene. Here were the familiar faces of her neighbours, each wrapped in winter scarves, cheeks flushed with warmth and holiday excitement. And yet, even in this familiar setting, she sensed subtle ripples beneath the surface, small signs that all was not entirely as it seemed. Groups clustered near the bar, exchanging greetings and light-hearted complaints about the weather, while the local choir rehearsed quietly in the corner, their voices rising and falling like a gentle tide. Miss Marple noted the lively chatter of Mrs. Bantry, who was animatedly recounting the unfortunate fate of a burnt Christmas pudding, while her husband, Colonel Bantry, listened with polite amusement but a faint furrow in his brow. It was a minor detail, easily overlooked by others, but to Miss Marple it hinted at an undercurrent of concern. She had long learned that even the smallest signs, a hesitation in speech, a distracted glance, could reveal much about a person's preoccupations. A group of younger villagers had gathered near the hearth, passing around paper-wrapped parcels and whispering about an unusual stranger who had arrived in the village that morning. Miss Marple's curiosity sharpened as her eyes discreetly found him, a man with a neat overcoat and a quiet, measured manner, speaking just softly enough to ensure his words were partially hidden from casual ears. His gaze, however, occasionally lingered on various corners of the room, a faint shadow of something unreadable passing across his features. Even in a room filled with the comfort of friendship and tradition, his presence introduced a subtle tension, like the first brush of winter wind before a storm. She observed the innkeeper bustling among the tables, offering bowls of spiced nuts and warming mugs of cider. A candle on one of the mantel shelves flickered oddly, as though someone had brushed past it too quickly. Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the brief dimming of the flame, the way the stranger's coat swished past in that exact moment. She made no sudden movement, simply tucked the observation away, filing it for later reflection. These little incongruities, trivial as they might appear to others, were often the threads from which larger patterns could be woven. Conversations drifted around her, revealing more than just holiday cheer. A hushed remark about a missing gift, a quiet grumble over a delayed delivery of sweets, whispers of old village feuds. Each fragment hinted at a web of small grievances and long-held suspicion. Miss Marple noted how some villagers smiled politely, while their hands fidgeted with napkins or sleeves. The stranger, meanwhile, lingered near the back, occasionally nodding or murmuring agreement, never revealing more than necessary. Even in a village as tightly knit as St. Mary Mead, One unfamiliar presence could unsettle the familiar rhythm of communal life, creating ripples that reached into conversations, glances, and gestures. Yet despite these subtle disturbances, the inn retained its warmth. The crackle of the fire, the soft melody of carols, and the scent of cinnamon and pine created an enveloping comfort. Miss Marple allowed herself a quiet moment to savor the atmosphere, knowing that beneath the cozy exterior, curiosity and mystery quietly stirred. In her mind, she began to consider the threads she would need to follow, questions that might reveal the stranger's purpose and uncover the hidden tensions he seemed to amplify. And as she observed the room once more, a soft thought flitted across her mind. Even in a village full of familiar faces, one stranger could make everyone feel unsettled. As the evening drew on, the inn began to empty, leaving only the soft glow of lanterns and the gentle crackle of the fire to accompany Miss Marple's quiet observations. She lingered near the church pew in the corner of the hall, where the last few carolers had been rehearsing earlier. Her gaze fell upon something small and inconspicuous tucked beneath the edge of the polished wooden seat, a folded piece of paper, its edges slightly worn and faintly scented with pine. Miss Marple's curiosity piqued, and with delicate care she retrieved the note, unfolding it to reveal a few carefully scrawled words that seemed almost hesitant in their formation. The message was cryptic, hinting at a secret buried long ago, a mystery wrapped in subtle suggestion rather than explicit declaration. Her eyes moved slowly across the room as she held the note, noting the villagers as they departed in the cold night. Some waved and smiled, oblivious to the hidden whisper of intrigue resting in her hand, while others cast glances over their shoulders, perhaps sensing more than they admitted. Miss Marple's mind worked steadily, weighing each expression, each gesture, attempting to connect the note to its likely sender. The stranger she had noticed earlier was nowhere in sight, yet the memory of his measured movements and watchful eyes lingered, casting a quiet shadow over her thoughts. Something about this simple slip of paper hinted at connections both old and unexpected, threads that might weave together past grievances, forgotten promises, or tales long buried in the village's history. She glanced around once more, noting the subtle disarray left behind, a misplaced hymn book, the faint indentation of a chair that had been hastily moved, the flicker of a candle that had burned low. Each detail seemed inconsequential on its own, yet together they suggested movement, presence, and intent. Miss Marple tucked the note gently into her pocket, her mind turning over the possibilities. Could one simple message reveal a web of secrets stretching quietly through St. Mary Mead, hidden from all but the most observant eyes? As she moved toward the door, she allowed herself to remember old tales whispered among villagers by firesides or in the hushed corridors of the local inn. One legend in particular surfaced, the story of a long-forgotten disagreement, a gift lost, and a promise never fulfilled. It was a tale that had faded with time, remembered only in fragments by the oldest residents, yet the note seemed to carry its echo. The notion that a small, seemingly innocuous message could breathe life into old mysteries made her pulse quicken, not with fear, but with the quiet thrill of discovery that had accompanied her in so many past investigations. Stepping out into the crisp night air, Miss Marple drew her shawl tightly around her shoulders. The village lay silent under a blanket of snow, street lamps casting soft golden halos on the freshly dusted cobblestones. She paused for a moment, considering who among the departing villagers might have left the note behind. The possibilities were endless, each one more intriguing than the last. Perhaps it was a warning, a plea, or a subtle invitation to uncover what had long been hidden. Whatever its purpose, it demanded careful attention, patience, and the sort of quiet observation that Miss Marple had long perfected. She made her way back toward her own cottage, each step measured, her mind weaving possibilities and gently connecting dots. The note's words repeated in her mind like a soft chant, encouraging reflection and scrutiny. With the warmth of her fire awaiting her, and the hush of the snowy night surrounding the village, she allowed herself the satisfaction of anticipation. In a village as close-knit as St. Mary Mead, secrets were rarely kept forever, but sometimes it took the most unassuming messenger, a simple folded note, to unravel what had lain quietly for years. And as Miss Marple closed the door behind her, she whispered to herself, not with alarm, but with gentle intrigue, perhaps tonight one small message could reveal more than anyone expected. Chapter 2. The Candlelight Mystery. The morning sun filtered gently through the tall, stained-glass windows of St. Mary Mead's church, casting a kaleidoscope of soft colours across the worn wooden pews. Miss Marple settled herself on a familiar bench, carefully unfolding the note she had found the night before. In the quiet of the morning, the cryptic words seemed different somehow, sharper against the serene backdrop of the church, hinting at stories hidden beneath the cheerful facade of village life. The faint scent of candle wax lingered in the air, and she allowed herself a small smile at the comforting familiarity of the place. Even in the midst of mystery, there was something undeniably soothing about the sun spilling over the polished floorboards. As she examined the note under the morning light, her eyes flicked toward the candles that still burned faintly on the altar. Their flames danced with unusual shadows, stretching across the walls in ways that seemed almost deliberate, as if the church itself were conspiring to reveal secrets to those willing to notice. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, tracing the elongated shapes with careful attention, pondering what these fleeting shadows might signify. Shadows tell stories even the brightest candle cannot hide, she thought, noting the subtle movement of the flame as a reflection of both the physical and metaphorical truths waiting to be discovered. Her gaze shifted to the visitors who had already begun to arrive, villagers seeking quiet moments before the day's festivities. She greeted familiar faces with gentle nods and exchanged soft pleasantries, all the while observing their mannerisms with careful precision. One neighbour's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his scarf. Another's gaze flickered toward a corner of the church, as though expecting someone or something to appear. A conversation with the organist revealed an unusual request for a hymn change that evening, a seemingly trivial detail that nevertheless caught Miss Marple's attention. Each small inconsistency layered upon the other, forming a tapestry of subtle clues that only a practiced eye could detect. Walking slowly between the pews, she allowed herself to reflect on the warmth of the church's atmosphere. It smelled faintly of pine, polished wood, and beeswax, a combination that reminded her of many Christmases past. Villagers shared soft laughter over remembered anecdotes, yet under the cheerful chatter, Miss Marple noted a gentle undercurrent of anxiety. It was in the slight hesitation before answering questions, the careful avoidance of certain topics, and the occasional furtive glance. Even in these comfortable surroundings, curiosity and mystery coexisted quietly, waiting to be coaxed into the light. With a subtle nod to herself, Miss Marple began to ask gentle questions, casually enough that they would not alarm anyone, yet sharp enough to reveal the inconsistency she suspected. A neighbour's recollection of the previous night differed in minute but telling ways from another's account. A story about a misplaced candle seemed to hold a discrepancy in timing. As she made mental notes, her mind wandered to the possibilities. What could have caused these small ripples beneath the surface of the village's calm? Each observation, each flicker of shadow, seemed to promise answers if only one followed the trail patiently. By the time the church emptied for the morning service, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. She had observed, noted, and connected threads that might appear inconsequential to anyone else. The note, the flickering candlelight, the whispered inconsistencies, all hinted at a subtle tension lingering in the village's fabric. She tucked the note carefully back into her coat pocket and allowed herself a brief moment to savour the slow thrill of discovery. In St. Mary Mead, Even the gentlest of mornings could reveal mysteries hidden in plain sight, waiting for a discerning eye to bring them to light. The snow outside lay thick and undisturbed, a soft white blanket that muffled the usual village sounds and lent St. Mary Mead an almost timeless quality. Miss Marple walked along the cobbled streets toward the small tea shop, her thoughts turning over the note and the flickering shadows she had observed in the church. She did not expect company, yet as she approached the corner by the old clock tower, she noticed the stranger from the inn standing silently beneath the lamplight, his breath rising in gentle clouds. His presence was calm, yet deliberate, and the measured way he regarded the village hinted at a story only he could tell. He greeted her with a nod, and though his smile was faint, it carried an air of purpose. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, voice soft yet clear. "St. Mary Mead carries memories most people prefer to forget, and yet some cannot help but leave traces." His words were cryptic, like a whisper meant for attentive ears, and Miss Marple's curiosity deepened instantly. She allowed him a moment to finish his thought before replying, asking gently who he had spoken to during his stay and whether he had noticed anything unusual. The stranger's eyes twinkled ever so slightly, as though he enjoyed the subtle challenge of sharing without revealing too much. As they walked along the snow-lined streets, the stranger spoke in measured tones, revealing fragments of the village's past. He mentioned old rivalries between families, disputes long settled but never fully forgotten, and tales of promises broken on Christmas Eve decades before. Miss Marple listened attentively, asking soft questions that coaxed details without appearing intrusive. Each story he offered seemed to mirror some current unease she had observed, the slight tensions, the hesitant glances, the whispers among neighbours. In these layers she began to sense the threads connecting past and present, a delicate web that tied the village together in ways both comforting and unsettling. They paused by the tea shop, where smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the faint smell of fresh bread drifted through the air. Miss Marple asked about specific houses she had noticed in her morning observations, curious whether the stranger had insights into the people within. He replied vaguely, yet each answer carried small hints, tiny nuances she had not previously noticed. Perhaps a glance toward a certain window, the careful avoidance of a particular street, or the subtle inflection of a name. All of these details added texture to the narrative he was weaving. Miss Marple's mind worked quietly, cataloguing each element, aware that the truth often hid between the lines. The stranger's tale moved with a rhythm that balanced history and intrigue, never rushed, always leaving room for thought. Villagers passed by, some nodding politely, others casting quick, questioning glances, yet he remained a calm figure, neither imposing nor anxious. He spoke of old family feuds, mislaid letters, and one faded tradition that had shaped the village more than most cared to admit. Miss Marple gently connected each fragment to her observations, noting who might be implicated and where the strands of the story might lead. Every stranger carries a story, she reflected, but whose story hides a truth? By the time their conversation drew to a close, the sun had risen higher, soft rays reflecting off the snow, warming the edges of the village in gentle gold. Miss Marple thanked the stranger for his insights, careful not to reveal the full extent of her deductions, and watched as he melted back into the quiet streets, leaving only footprints behind. As she turned toward the inn to consider her next steps, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The village, cozy and serene under its snowy blanket, held secrets layered within memories and gestures, and the stranger had just added another piece to a puzzle she was determined to solve. Each detail, however small, seemed infused with quiet significance, a whisper of mysteries waiting patiently for the right observer to notice. Chapter 3. Secrets in the Snow. The morning air was crisp and invigorating, carrying the faint scent of pine and the lingering chill of freshly fallen snow. Miss Marple wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders as she walked past the churchyard, her eyes drawn to the unbroken whiteness of the ground. And yet, something unusual caught her attention. A set of footprints, precise and deliberate, winding through the fresh powder with a purpose that was immediately apparent to her trained eye. Each step was measured, the spacing irregular enough to suggest thoughtfulness, not haste. She paused to study them, her mind quietly cataloguing the possibilities. Who had been here, and why, at this early hour? The footprints led her along a narrow path that twisted behind the church, eventually disappearing into a secluded corner of the village garden, where holly and ivy cloaked the fences and shrubs in deep green against the white snow. Miss Marple crouched briefly, noting small indentations in the soft ground near the edges of the path, perhaps a dropped item or a deliberate mark meant to signal something to someone else. She traced the line with her gaze, following its subtle curves and sudden shifts, and felt the familiar thrill of quiet discovery settle over her. Snow keeps secrets, and sometimes it whispers them to those who know where to look. As she wandered slowly through the garden, she allowed herself a few moments of reflection on the surrounding village. St. Mary Mead, she thought, seemed serene in the winter light, each rooftop dusted with snow and each garden path glistening with frost. Birds flitted silently among the branches, leaving tiny tracks of their own behind. Even in this moment of delicate tranquility, the footprints hinted at movement, intention, and hidden purpose. Miss Marple considered the ways in which the natural world often mirrored human behavior, patterns, pauses, and small signs that spoke volumes to those willing to notice. The path led her past a cluster of rose bushes, their stems bare but dusted with a fine layer of snow that sparkled in the morning sun. She bent slightly, noting small disturbances in the snow beneath the bushes, perhaps a dropped piece of paper or a forgotten object, though she did not disturb it immediately. Every detail she knew could carry significance. A stray leaf, a misplaced twig, or the depth of an impression in the snow might reveal more than a hurried glance would allow. Each observation was a thread in the growing tapestry of mystery that surrounded her, subtle yet insistent in its quiet message. As she continued, Miss Marple reflected on the village's rhythms, the small daily routines that marked life in St. Mary Mead. Neighbours would soon emerge to tend to chores, children would leave tracks of their own in the snow, and the inn would begin to fill with the aroma of freshly baked bread and mulled cider. Yet the footprints she followed seemed untouched by the ordinary flow of life, deliberate and private, as if belonging to someone who wished their movements to remain unseen. Finally, the trail ended near a small garden shed, partially hidden behind ivy and the last remnants of frost-covered hedges. Miss Marple stepped closer, considering what might have been left behind or overlooked. She knew that in a village like this, even the smallest detail could carry meaning. Snow, she reflected, was a keeper of secret, a silent witness to actions and intentions. With careful eyes and patient observation, one could uncover stories hidden beneath its pristine surface, stories that might otherwise remain lost until revealed by the most perceptive observer. And as she stood there, absorbing the stillness of the garden, she felt a quiet certainty that the path she had traced would lead her closer to answers, waiting patiently just beneath the snow. Miss Marple returned to the village paths, the crunch of snow beneath her feet soft but deliberate, each step echoing lightly in the quiet morning. She paused outside familiar cottages, noticing the subtle signs of life, smoke curling lazily from chimneys, curtains slightly drawn, footprints that hinted at hurried departures or secretive meetings. The village was waking slowly, and in these gentle moments she began to engage with her neighbours, seeking conversation that was ordinary on the surface, but, in her practised observation, full of hidden meaning. Not every word is spoken, and not every silence is innocent. Her first stop was at the door, of Mrs. Price, a long-time resident known for her love of gossip and her careful discretion. Mrs. Price greeted her warmly, but her hands fidgeted with the edge of her shawl as she spoke. Miss Marple commented casually on the snow and the morning light, listening carefully to the woman's responses. Between the lines, she detected hesitation, a subtle tension in the rhythm of speech that suggested Mrs. Price knew more than she was letting on. With a few gentle questions, Miss Marple drew out fragments of information about recent deliveries, a missing key, and conversations overheard in passing, all of which seemed unconnected at first glance, but hinted at a pattern forming beneath the village's calm exterior. Moving on, she encountered young Mr. Hollis, who was clearing snow from his steps with a meticulous attention to detail. He smiled politely, yet his gaze kept darting toward the churchyard, as though expecting someone to emerge. Miss Marple asked about the paths in the garden, allowing her voice to carry a tone of casual curiosity. In response, he offered half-answers, phrases that started with confidence but faltered when pressed. She noticed the slight tightening of his jaw and the way his eyes flickered to a nearby window. These small hesitations, she knew, were windows into truth as much as words themselves. As she continued along the village street, she found herself speaking with several others, each conversation revealing more than what was stated outright. A neighbour's tale of a misplaced ornament contained subtle contradictions. A comment on a recent letter carried an undercurrent of unease, and a whispered remark about preparations for the upcoming festivities hinted at long-forgotten grievances. The tapestry of small secrets and half-truths began to emerge, like the intricate patterns in frost on a window pane, delicate and easily overlooked unless observed closely. Miss Marple's attention to detail allowed her to piece together a network of intentions, anxieties and unspoken stories that threaded through the village quietly. Waiting for discovery, she paused by the market square, observing the interplay of villagers exchanging greetings, checking lists and tidying their carts. The warmth of the winter sun caught on the glass of shop windows, illuminating small reflections that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. A clerk adjusted a display, and the faint tremor in his movement told a story he did not voice. Children ran past, their laughter masking subtle glances toward corners of the square, suggesting they had seen things adults might dismiss. Miss Marple made mental notes, understanding that the smallest behavioral cues could reveal connections invisible to a casual observer. By the time she returned to her own path toward the inn, she felt the subtle weight of the morning's observations settling into her mind. The village, tranquil and picturesque under its snowy cover, held tensions and secrets beneath its cheerful exterior. Miss Marple reflected on the nature of human communication, the things said, the things left unsaid, and the gentle art of noticing the difference. With a sense of quiet satisfaction, she considered which threads to follow next, confident that each hushed conversation, each fleeting glance, and each hesitation in speech would guide her closer to understanding. In St. Mary Mead, silence was never empty, and words were rarely innocent. Both carried stories waiting for the careful listener to uncover. Chapter 4. A Whispered Confession. Night had fallen softly over St. Mary Mead, draping the village in a gentle hush that was broken only by the occasional rustle of winter wind through bare branches. Miss Marple walked along the cobblestone streets, her steps quiet on the snow-dusted paths, eyes alert to the subtle signs of life still lingering behind closed doors. Lights glimmered from unexpected windows, some steady and warm, others flickering as if shadows danced against the curtains. Each glow hinted at activity, however ordinary it might seem, and to Miss Marple, even the smallest flicker held significance. Even in the quietest nights, whispers reveal what daylight hides. She paused beneath the window of the old Aldridge house, noting the soft, tentative sound of piano keys drifting through the crisp air. The melody was incomplete, as if the player had been interrupted mid-thought, and Miss Marple's mind catalogued the small possibilities. A visitor departed hastily, a note left behind, or perhaps a rehearsal intended for no one in particular. Nearby, a wreath on a front door hung slightly askew, suggesting it had been adjusted, or perhaps brushed against in a rush. A curtain fluttered and snapped closed, leaving only a faint sliver of light, a secret glimpse into the evening's unseen movements. Continuing down the narrow lane, she observed the smoke curling lazily from chimneys, each curl rising in delicate spirals before dispersing into the starry night. There was a rhythm to the village at this hour, doors opening and closing, the soft murmur of conversation through partially opened windows, the distant bark of a dog alerting its owner to some insignificant disturbance. To an ordinary observer, these were nothing more than the gentle sounds of a peaceful village. To Miss Marple, each moment contained subtle hints of unseen activity, movements that could easily pass unnoticed if one did not pay careful attention. A lantern hung outside the village inn, casting a warm glow on the snow-covered steps. Miss Marple paused, noting a chair that had been moved slightly, leaving faint impressions in the snow beneath. She crouched briefly, examining the footprints, some from villagers walking home, others from someone whose gait was purposeful, yet uncertain. Even as the night retained its cozy stillness, she could feel the faint pulse of hidden stories, unfolding quietly against the backdrop of twinkling stars. Her reflections wandered beyond the physical details, touching on the people themselves. The village, familiar and comforting by day, seemed transformed at night, revealing nuances that daylight concealed. Faces that appeared open in the sun could carry hesitation or secret intent once shadows stretched across walls. Miss Marple allowed herself a small smile at the thought. She had long known that the charm of a village often masked undercurrents of curiosity, small intrigues, and human foibles that revealed themselves only in the stillness of night. She lingered by the edge of the village garden, noting the way moonlight glinted on the frost-covered hedges. The quiet was almost meditative, a contrast to the sharp thrill of observation and deduction that always accompanied her musings. Each subtle shift, a curtain twitch, a shutter closed too quickly, the echo of a distant footstep was like a whisper meant only for those who were attentive. Miss Marple felt the familiar stir of anticipation, the gentle pull of questions waiting to be answered, and the comforting knowledge that in St. Mary Mead, even the quietest nights carried the promise of discovery. As she turned to make her way home, the village seemed to settle around her, cozy yet alive with the soft hum of secrets. She tucked her shawl tighter and breathed in the crisp winter air, letting the quiet mystery of the night guide her thoughts. Small details, she reflected, often revealed far more than words ever could, and she knew that tonight, as always, the village held stories that would unfold with patient attention. Miss Marple had barely reached the edge of her own garden when she noticed a familiar figure lingering in the shadows near the lamplight, a villager whose posture was hesitant, almost furtive. The air was crisp, and their breath rose in small clouds as they stepped closer, lowering their voice so only Miss Marple could hear.
"I think I should tell you something," the villager began, eyes darting toward the darkened windows of neighbouring cottages.
The words were careful, weighed with an obvious mixture of fear and relief, as though admitting the truth carried both risk and liberation. They led her to a quieter corner, where the soft glow of a street lamp spilled over a patch of snow, illuminating the villager's expression, a mixture of shame, apprehension, and anticipation. Miss Marple listened with gentle attentiveness, nodding subtly to encourage the confession without pressing too hard. The villager spoke in fragmented sentences, revealing only fragments of a long-held secret, a story that had remained buried beneath years of caution and quiet concern. Even in the soft, winter-lit street, the weight of the revelation was palpable, tugging at the edges of Miss Marple's curiosity.
"I didn't mean for anyone to know," they whispered, glancing nervously around as if the snow itself could carry news of their admission. "But it's connected, I think, to the note you found."
I've kept it hidden for so long, and now it feels impossible to hold it in any longer." Miss Marple inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the gravity of the moment while maintaining an encouraging calm. She did not interrupt. Instead, she allowed the villager the space to unfold their story in their own rhythm. Knowing that the subtleties often revealed as much as the words themselves, the confession moved slowly, revealing glimpses of long-forgotten grievances, misinterpreted intentions, and small misunderstandings that had grown over time into a quiet tension permeating the village. Each revelation hinted at connections between neighbors, old promises left unfulfilled, and actions that had been misread or misremembered. Miss Marple absorbed each detail, mentally arranging them against the observations she had gathered over the past days: the footprints in the snow, the flickering candlelight, the cryptic note tucked beneath the pew. Patterns were beginning to emerge, though still incomplete, and the villager's hesitant disclosure added a vital piece to the unfolding puzzle. Occasionally, the villager paused as though afraid to continue, their hands fidgeting in their coat pockets or tracing faint lines in the snow. Miss Marple offered soft reassurance, speaking in calm tones about the importance of honesty and the relief that sometimes comes when a long-held secret is shared. Slowly, the fragments coalesced, and even though the confession remained partial, it was enough to illuminate hidden tensions and offer new pathways for inquiry. Each word carried the gentle weight of vulnerability, and Miss Marple felt a quiet appreciation for the courage it took to speak in such a delicate moment. By the time the villager finished, the sky had deepened into a velvety indigo, and the quiet of the night seemed to settle over them like a protective blanket. Miss Marple thanked them softly, her mind already turning over the new information, considering how it might connect to the stranger, the note, and the subtle signs she had observed in the village. Sometimes a single confession opens 1,000 doors, she reflected, realizing that this revelation, while incomplete, had already illuminated aspects of the mystery that had previously eluded her. As the villager departed quietly, slipping away into the soft shadows, Miss Marple lingered for a moment, absorbing the stillness of the winter night. The village, cozy and familiar, had revealed another layer of its secrets, and she felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. Each whispered truth, each hesitant disclosure, drew her closer to understanding the hidden patterns of human behavior in St. Mary Mead, and she knew that the story was only beginning to unfold. Chapter 5. The Village Keeps Its Secrets. Miss Marple settled into the quiet corner of the village archive, the scent of aged paper and polished wood enveloping her like an old friend. Sunlight filtered softly through tall windows, illuminating rows of shelves stacked with bound ledgers, yellowed letters, and meticulously kept records. She ran her fingers along the spines, noting familiar names alongside those long forgotten, aware that history is not always buried, it waits patiently to be found. Each book, each bundle of papers, seemed to hum with the echoes of past lives, disputes, and secrets that had quietly shaped the village she knew so well. She began to leaf through a ledger, documenting events from decades past, her eyes scanning for anything that might hint at unresolved tensions. Immediately, patterns began to emerge. Old rivalries between families who had once been close neighbors, promises made during village festivities that were never fulfilled, and disputes over property lines and small inheritances that had left lingering resentment. Miss Marple noted the similarities between these historical grievances and the subtle frictions she had observed among the villagers during recent gatherings. The past, she thought, had a way of seeping into the present, quietly influencing behavior in ways that were often invisible to those living through it. A faded newspaper clipping fell from the pages of one ledger, detailing a Christmas Eve event decades ago, a small gift mysteriously missing from a celebration, a heated argument discreetly resolved but never fully forgotten, and a local legend that had begun to circulate among the oldest residents. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly as she recognized elements reminiscent of the note she had found and the footprints in the snow. It was as if the village's history were a mirror reflecting current unease, hinting that secrets long thought dormant might still be stirring beneath the surface. She paused to make careful notes, jotting down names, dates, and the connections she began to see forming across generations. Miss Marple appreciated the gentle rhythm of this discovery, the soothing act of reading and piecing together histories, even as the quiet thrill of unraveling a mystery hummed beneath her calm exterior. She reflected on how ordinary villagers, now carrying their daily routines and small worries, were shaped in subtle ways by the echoes of these past events. In every gentle gesture, every polite conversation, traces of history lingered, influencing actions, decisions, and even unspoken tensions. Her attention shifted to a ledger detailing property records and previous tenants, each entry carefully preserved with the neat script of long-departed clerks. She noted the arrival and departure of certain families, the exchange of goods, and mentions of minor disputes over festivals and gifts. These seemingly mundane records were anything but ordinary. In their accumulation, they revealed patterns, connections, and small injustices that had faded from memory but could explain much about the present. Miss Marple smiled faintly, appreciating the way history spoke softly yet insistently to those who cared to listen. By mid-morning, she had compiled a mental map of relationships, grievances, and lingering mysteries that tied past events to the current stirrings in the village. Each discovery, carefully noted, was another key, turning the lock on questions that had so far remained unanswered. History, she reflected, was patient. It waited quietly, layered beneath cheerful exteriors, ready to offer insights to those willing to look carefully. And in St. Mary Mead, she realized, the past and present were intertwined in ways that would soon reveal more than any single villager might have anticipated. Miss Marple closed the ledger gently and placed it back on the shelf, her mind alive with connections and possibilities as she stepped toward the door. The village outside seemed unchanged, serene under the winter sun. Yet she carried with her a quiet certainty. Beneath the cozy facade, old histories were stirring, and each careful observation she made could illuminate truths long hidden. The puzzle, she knew, was far from complete, but every piece she uncovered brought her closer to understanding the intricate web of secrets that the village kept so carefully tucked away. Miss Marple returned to the inn later that afternoon, carrying with her the quiet excitement of discoveries made among the village archives. The inn was warm, the fire crackling softly in the hearth, casting a comforting glow across the polished wood and familiar faces. As villagers moved about, tidying tables and arranging decorations for the evening, Miss Marple allowed her eyes to wander, noting details that might seem trivial to others. Even the smallest things, a misplaced ornament, a slightly askew chair, a folded napkin left out of place, could carry meaning. Even the smallest details can illuminate the darkest truths. Her attention was first drawn to the main hall, where the Christmas tree stood proudly, its branches heavy with ornaments and candles. One ornament hung slightly lower than the others, as if nudged into a corner or handled too roughly. Miss Marple knelt briefly, observing the pattern of the placement and the slight scratches in the wood beneath it. Perhaps it was nothing, she considered, yet her instincts suggested otherwise. In a village where every action, intentional or accidental, had a ripple effect, small deviations often spoke louder than words. Moving quietly among the tables, she noticed a letter half hidden beneath a napkin, as if someone had placed it there in haste and forgotten it. She picked it up carefully, recognizing handwriting that belonged to one of the older villagers. The note contained few words, but the phrasing hinted at concern, secrecy, and unspoken promises. Miss Marple traced the lines of ink with her eyes, thinking of the cryptic note she had found beneath the pew days earlier, and the confession whispered under the lamplight. Each fragment seemed to connect, forming delicate threads of intrigue that wove together past and present. She glanced toward the fireplace, where shadows danced across the walls in the warmth of the flames. Subtle movements caught her eye, a drawer left slightly open, a chair shifted just enough to suggest recent use, and a faint smudge on the window pane that hinted at a hand pressed lightly against it. These observations, she realized, were not merely incidental. They carried stories of hurried actions, quiet exchanges, and hidden intentions. With patient attention, Miss Marple began to assemble the narrative in her mind, recognizing how minor details often revealed truths far larger than any casual observer could detect. Stepping toward the corner where villagers had gathered in small groups, she listened to fragments of conversation, noting discrepancies between words and expressions. One young woman spoke of a missing gift, yet her eyes darted nervously toward the window. Another gentleman described a past Christmas with careful cheer, yet his hands fidgeted with the edge of his coat. These subtle revelations, seemingly insignificant, added texture to the larger mystery that had quietly unfolded over the past days. Miss Marple's mind catalogued, compared, and gently inferred, building a tapestry of possibilities that merged observation, intuition, and history. By the time the afternoon sunlight had softened into the gentle hues of early evening, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. Each detail she had noticed, an ornament slightly out of place, a forgotten letter, a shadow cast by a flame, was another piece of the intricate puzzle that St. Mary Mead had become. The village's warmth and charm remained intact, yet beneath it lay threads of human behavior, past grievances and unspoken intentions, all waiting for careful attention to reveal their meaning. She settled into her favorite chair near the fireplace, noting the comforting rhythm of the inn as the day drew to a close. The fire's glow danced on her notes, reflecting the careful observations she had recorded and the quiet connections she had drawn between them. In the village, life continued its cozy routine, yet Miss Marple knew that the secrets hinted at by these subtle revelations would soon converge, bringing clarity to questions that had lingered in shadow. And in that gentle anticipation, she felt the familiar thrill of mystery balanced with the comfort of home, ready to follow each delicate clue wherever it might lead. Chapter 6. The Final Carol. The morning of Christmas Eve dawned crisp and clear, the village of St. Mary Mead wrapped in a soft blanket of snow that reflected the golden sunlight in delicate sparkles. Miss Marple gathered a select group of villagers in the warm parlour of the inn, its fire crackling and sending a comforting glow across the polished wooden floors. The air was tinged with the familiar scents of pine, cinnamon, and freshly baked bread, yet beneath the cosy atmosphere, an undercurrent of anticipation hummed quietly. When past and present meet, truths cannot hide forever, she reminded herself, as she prepared to navigate both memory and hesitation. Seated around the fire, the villagers exchanged polite greetings, though some fidgeted subtly in their chairs, betraying the unease they could not voice. Miss Marple spoke gently, framing her inquiries in the context of shared memories and festive reflection, softening the edge of each question. She asked them to recount events from previous Christmases, carefully listening for inconsistencies or omissions. Each story, while on the surface warm and familiar, carried subtle clues, a hesitation here, a slip of the tongue there, hints that contrasted with accounts from others. She noted them all, cataloguing contradictions and motives without casting judgment, for understanding required patience and observation rather than accusation. As memories flowed, the room filled with the comforting sounds of laughter, the occasional sniffle of sentiment, and the gentle hum of the fire. Yet even within this domestic warmth, Miss Marple discerned the tension beneath the words. A misplaced glance toward a corner, a hand that lingered nervously on a cup, and a subtle shift in posture all added layers to the story that could not be captured by mere recollection. She invited gentle reflection, allowing villagers to revisit their own memories while noting the small signs that hinted at deeper truths. Each narrative was a thread, connecting past events to the current unease that had subtly woven itself through the village over days and weeks. She paused periodically, encouraging the villagers to reflect on details they might have overlooked, the minor grievances or misunderstandings that had seemed trivial at the time but could illuminate present tensions. A missing gift, a poorly phrased comment, a promise forgotten in the bustle of the season, all were carefully examined in the warm light of the room. Miss Marple observed closely, her eyes capturing the faintest flickers of emotion, recognition, regret, or reluctance, each one a signal pointing toward hidden motivations. The discussion gradually revealed a pattern, one that wove together old disagreements, unspoken concerns, and subtle alliances. Miss Marple guided the conversation with gentle skill, drawing villagers toward revelations that were both illuminating and comforting, never harsh or accusatory. By the time the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long, soft shadows across the parlor, she had compiled a detailed mental map of the intertwining pasts, actions, and intentions of those present. As the villagers rose to leave, the tension in the room had shifted from unease to a quiet, thoughtful awareness. They moved with a gentle energy, their expressions contemplative yet lightened by the warmth of shared reflection. Miss Marple remained by the fire for a moment, gazing at the flickering flames, considering the next steps, and allowing the satisfaction of subtle discoveries to settle over her. In St. Mary Mead, the past and present had converged, revealing that even the most carefully guarded memories could not remain hidden forever. And with that knowledge, the stage was set for the final pieces of the mystery to emerge, balanced delicately between the comfort of home and the intrigue of revelation. Snow fell softly outside, coating the village in a gentle, sparkling hush as children's laughter drifted from the square. Miss Marple moved quietly along the familiar streets, her eyes taking in small details, the way a shutter was slightly ajar, a faint footprint leading from one garden to another, and the careful glances exchanged between neighbors. Even the kindest faces may hide intentions unseen, she reflected, and tonight, beneath the charm and cheer of St. Mary Mead, subtle tensions were beginning to surface. Returning to the inn, she found villagers gathering in the main hall, the fire casting long, flickering shadows that danced across polished floors and warmly decorated walls. Conversation was light but tinged with anticipation. Miss Marple noticed the way hands rested on mantels or the edge of a chair, how certain voices faltered momentarily when names were mentioned. Each gesture and hesitation was a thread, revealing connections that were not immediately obvious. Some were small, almost imperceptible, yet together they formed a pattern she had been quietly piecing together over days. A neighbor approached, speaking in a hushed tone, revealing a forgotten interaction with another villager, an exchange that, at the time, had seemed trivial. Miss Marple listened intently, recognizing how this seemingly minor event linked to the footprints in the snow, the note tucked beneath the pew, and the confessions whispered under lamplight. The web of hidden intentions was taking shape, delicate and intricate, stretching across families, friendships, and old grievances alike. She observed a young couple by the tree, noting the way their laughter didn't quite reach their eyes, and the nervous glances they exchanged when the discussion turned to past Christmases. An older resident sitting near the hearth fidgeted with a folded handkerchief, speaking of a promise made decades ago while avoiding mention of who had been involved. Each subtle revelation reinforced what she had suspected. Beneath the warmth and festivities, there were threads of history, intention, and unresolved tensions that still influenced behavior. As Miss Marple guided gentle conversation, encouraging recollections and soft reflections, she noticed the interplay of these connections growing clearer. A misplaced ornament on the mantel corresponded with an overlooked letter found days before. A hastily brushed hand along a banister mirrored a whispered comment from an earlier confession. The village, cozy and festive on the surface, revealed an underlying choreography of action and response, small choices echoing into consequences that had quietly shaped events. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the usual evening sounds, while children darted through the streets, their small boots leaving fleeting tracks. Miss Marple's gaze followed them, noting how innocence could mask awareness, how curiosity and observation intertwined. The patterns of human behavior, like the fleeting footprints in the snow, were often visible only to those willing to watch closely and connect disparate details. She appreciated the contrast between this gentle scene and the delicate tension she now understood to weave through the village. By the time the evening drew near, Miss Marple felt a quiet certainty settling over her observations. The hidden intentions, once faint and scattered, were becoming distinct, forming a map of relationships, motives, and unspoken truths. The warmth of the inn, the crackle of the fire, and the soft snowfall outside created an atmosphere that balanced comfort with suspense, allowing revelations to emerge without harshness. She understood that the village, charming and peaceful, held its secrets carefully, but careful attention and patient observation could illuminate what had remained unseen. As the villagers prepared for the final carol, a sense of anticipation filled the room, mingling with the cozy familiarity of home. Miss Marple reflected on how small actions and subtle glances had built the story of St. Mary Mead, how hidden intentions shaped the present, and how the coming moments would bring clarity. The village seemed alive with both warmth and intrigue, a perfect balance for the mystery to unfold fully. In every soft shadow and whispered exchange, she knew that the heart of the puzzle was close to revealing itself. Chapter 7. The Christmas Eve Revelation. Miss Marple settled into her favourite chair by the inn's fire, a steaming cup of tea warming her hand, and allowed her thoughts to drift through the events of the past days. Each observation, each fragment of conversation, each subtle detail replayed in her mind, and she began to reconstruct the sequence that had left St. Mary Mead quietly unsettled. Every puzzle has a pattern, and tonight all patterns converge. The footprints in the snow, the cryptic note, the half-spoken confessions, and the fleeting glances, all were pieces of a single intricate design, now slowly revealing itself under her careful attention. She began with the note tucked beneath the pew, recalling the precise wording and the unusual choice of hiding it in a place so public, yet easily overlooked. She connected it to the stranger's comments about old grudges and family disputes, recognizing that some of the tension she had observed at the Christmas Eve gathering had roots in events decades earlier. Miss Marple traced the threads in her mind, the forgotten promises, the minor grievances, and the small gestures that had carried meaning to those who knew the history. Each small clue, which might have seemed trivial on its own, now revealed its significance when viewed in relation to the others. Next, she considered the villagers' reactions, hesitations, half-truths, and fleeting gestures. The misplaced ornament, the hastily closed curtain, and the faint footprints all indicated deliberate actions and careful concealments. Miss Marple reflected on the confessions she had gently coaxed out, noting how each villager had been honest in parts, yet left certain threads unspoken either out of fear, embarrassment, or hope that the past would remain forgotten. Her mind moved deftly, linking one subtle hint to another, drawing a map of intentions and behaviors that highlighted motives, misunderstandings, and the delicate ways the village maintained its equilibrium. She thought of the stranger's story, the quiet details of old family disputes, and the echoes of past Christmases, where small tensions had been overlooked or politely ignored. Each recollection now fit into a larger narrative. The note had not been a random provocation, but a deliberate attempt to reveal something long hidden. Villagers' reactions, measured and cautious, had unwittingly reinforced the mystery, creating a series of small, almost imperceptible signals that only a careful observer could discern. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the garden, recalling the footprints that had led her to hidden corners, the gentle disturbances in the snow, and the quiet shifts in the landscape that indicated intentional movements. The snow had been a silent witness, capturing evidence of gestures and actions that otherwise would have passed unnoticed. The combination of these observations with oral recollections, confessions, and village records allowed her to reconstruct not just the sequence of events, but the emotions and motives behind them. By the time she finished piecing the puzzle, Miss Marple leaned back, satisfied with the clarity that had emerged. The village remained cozy and familiar, each lamplit window reflecting warmth and cheer, yet she now understood the subtle undercurrents that had created unease. She saw how past grievances, present misunderstandings, and careful concealments had intertwined, forming a story that had quietly affected the mood and actions of those she had observed, even as the inn filled with the gentle hum of preparations for the Christmas Eve carol. She felt a sense of quiet resolution settling over her. The pieces of the mystery aligned perfectly in her mind, revealing that the events had never been as alarming as they seemed, but rather a delicate weave of human nature, history, and intention. With all threads traced and patterns understood, Miss Marple prepared for the next step, identifying the person responsible for the cryptic note, understanding their motives, and gently restoring the village's peace and goodwill. The final moments of the evening settled gently over St. Mary Mead, the village streets glittering with freshly fallen snow, and the distant sound of carolers mingling with the occasional crackle from a chimney. Miss Marple stood quietly by the inn's hearth, her sharp eyes observing the villagers as they gathered for the last carol, each face reflecting warmth, curiosity, and a touch of lingering anticipation. The puzzle had been carefully pieced together, and now it was time to see the final pieces fall into place. The last prayer has been answered, but its echo lingers in heart. Drawing the villagers closer, Miss Marple began to recount the events of the past days in a gentle, deliberate tone. She spoke of the footprints in the snow, the folded note beneath the pew, the subtle confessions, and the historical threads that connected past grievances to present tensions. Her narrative moved carefully, neither accusatory nor dramatic, but infused with clarity and calm insight. Villagers listened intently, some with wide-eyed surprise, others with faint smiles of recognition as long-hidden connections became clear before them. Then, with the softest pause, she revealed the identity of the person who had left the cryptic note. It was someone whose actions had been motivated not by malice, but by concern and a desire to protect a delicate balance long overlooked. Miss Marple explained the reasoning, the careful placement of the note, the choice of timing, and the subtle hints that had pointed to them. The villagers, hearing the explanation, began to nod, murmurs of acknowledgement spreading quietly through the room. The person responsible stepped forward, a mixture of relief and embarrassment in their expression. Ready at last to have their intentions understood, Miss Marple described the motives clearly yet compassionately. The note had been an attempt to draw attention to an unresolved issue, a hidden tension between families and friends that, left unchecked, could have caused further misunderstanding. By leaving the message, the villager had hoped to reveal the truth without confrontation, to allow clarity to emerge naturally. The room held a hushed respect for the thoughtfulness behind the act, recognizing that what might have seemed mysterious or unsettling was, in fact, an act of care and vigilance for the well-being of the community. As the final pieces of the story fell into place, Miss Marple guided the conversation to reconciliation and reflection. She gently encouraged villagers to consider past misunderstandings with kindness, to appreciate the efforts made to preserve harmony, and to acknowledge that even small actions could carry great significance. The warmth of the inn, the glow of the fire, and the soft laughter of children outside created a backdrop of comfort against which the final revelations resonated fully. Relationships were reassessed, old grudges softened, and the delicate threads of human connection were restored with quiet grace. By the time the last carol was sung, The tension that had lingered subtly throughout the village dissipated, replaced by understanding and a gentle sense of closure. Miss Marple watched as neighbours exchanged thoughtful smiles, shared anecdotes, and allowed the light-hearted cheer of the season to wash over them. The note, once a source of quiet mystery, had achieved its purpose. It had revealed hidden truths, fostered reflection, and ultimately strengthened the bonds of the village community. As the villagers began to disperse into the snowy night, Miss Marple lingered for a moment by the hearth, sipping her tea and observing the peaceful scene. The snow continued to fall softly, muffling sounds and wrapping the village in serenity. She reflected on the delicate balance between secrecy and revelation, intention and perception, and the gentle way human nature shaped every unfolding event. In St. Mary Mead, mysteries were never truly frightening, but they were always instructive, reminding all who paid attention that understanding, patience, and a touch of observation could illuminate even the most hidden truths. Chapter 8. Peace Restored. The morning after Christmas Eve dawned crisp and bright, the sun scattering diamonds across the snow-dusted rooftops of St. Mary Mead. Villagers emerged from their cottages with a newfound lightness in their steps, carrying warm mugs of tea and plates of pastries, their conversations cheerful yet tinged with quiet contemplation. Even mysteries end, but their lessons remain quietly in hearts, Miss Marple thought, observing the gentle rhythms of daily life resuming with a softer, more attentive air. The village seemed wrapped not only in snow but in understanding and forgiveness, each neighbour embracing the warmth of reflection alongside the comforts of home. Miss Marple wandered along the familiar streets, pausing at windows to watch villagers sharing greetings and small acts of kindness. One neighbour helped another clear snow from a doorstep. A group gathered near the inn, laughter and conversation weaving naturally into the morning air. She noted how previous tensions, minor disagreements, overlooked grievances and unspoken words had softened in light of the recent revelations. Human nature, she reflected, was often complicated, but patience, gentle observation, and a willingness to see beyond first impressions could uncover compassion hidden even beneath layers of misunderstanding. Inside the inn, the fire crackled invitingly as villagers settled into the warmth, sharing tales of Christmases past and enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. Miss Marple joined them, her presence calm and reassuring, listening with quiet attentiveness as people recounted small gestures of reconciliation, apologies given with a blush, a forgotten promise honoured, a miscommunication finally clarified. She smiled at the ease with which the village had embraced these reconciliations, recognizing that it was not only the mysteries that required careful attention, but the hearts and intentions of those involved. Her observations extended to small details that spoke volumes: the deliberate placement of chairs to invite conversation, the gentle offering of pastries to neighbours, the way a child handed a carefully wrapped gift to an elder with wide-eyed pride. Each moment, though ordinary on the surface, reflected subtle lessons in kindness, attentiveness, and understanding. Miss Marple noted how easily such lessons could be overlooked when distractions or unspoken anxieties intervened. Yet now, in this serene morning light, the village embraced them naturally, as if the gentle resolution of events had awakened an awareness that had quietly waited to be noticed. She reflected on the note, the confessions, and the final revelations that had unravelled the mystery of Christmas Eve. What had begun as subtle unease had transformed into learning, forgiveness, and renewed bonds between neighbours. Even the youngest children, unaware of the subtleties that had occupied the adults' attention, carried forward a sense of reassurance, their laughter blending harmoniously with the gentle hum of the village. Miss Marple appreciated how moments of clarity, honesty, and compassion had a way of rippling through a community, softening hearts and fostering quiet gratitude. By midday, the inn was filled with gentle conversation, the smell of freshly baked bread, and the soft glow of sunlight reflecting off the polished wooden surfaces. Miss Marple sipped her tea slowly, allowing herself to absorb the comforting scene. Her reflections were warm, noting that the human capacity for kindness, observation, and patience could transform even the most puzzling situations into opportunities for connection and understanding. In St. Mary Mead, the resolution of one mystery had revealed a timeless truth, that even in the midst of secrets, tensions, and unspoken intentions, the lessons learned quietly endured, shaping how people saw themselves and one another. As the morning waned, Miss Marple rose from her seat and stepped toward the window, gazing at the village square. Snowflakes continued to drift lazily from the sky, settling softly over roofs and garden hedges. Each roof, each lamp-post, each smiling face seemed to carry the quiet glow of reconciliation and reflection. Even mysteries end, she reminded herself, but their lessons linger gently, imprinted not in loud proclamations but in the small, enduring acts of kindness and understanding that wove through a community, quietly restoring hearts as surely as the snow restored the village's pristine beauty. As evening settled over St. Mary Mead, the village was bathed in the gentle glow of lanterns and candlelight, their soft flicker reflected in the windows of cottages and the inn alike. Children's laughter had faded into contented murmurs, and the streets, once alive with footsteps and snowball games, were now quiet under a thick, sparkling layer of snow. Miss Marple strolled slowly along the familiar lanes, savouring the serenity that followed the day's revelations. As the snow settles, so too do hearts, quietly warmed by understanding, she reflected, appreciating the delicate balance between peace and the echoes of lessons learned. At the inn, the final preparations for the night had been completed. Tables were tidied, mugs washed, and a gentle warmth radiated from the hearth, inviting anyone who lingered to share a quiet moment before retiring. Villagers moved with a gentle ease, exchanging final words of gratitude and reflection, their interactions lighter than in previous days. Miss Marple observed how small gestures now carried greater significance. A hand offered to steady a wobbling chair, a whispered thank you or a smile held a beat longer, acknowledging both shared history and the understanding born of recent events. She paused by the window overlooking the village square, noting how the snow seemed to absorb sound, leaving a hushed, almost reverent atmosphere. Each house, each lamplight, each figure moving quietly along the street contributed to a sense of restored calm. The resolution of the mystery reflected not only in actions, but in the subtle shifts of expression and posture. Neighbors who had once avoided certain topics now shared gentle conversations, laughter mingling with soft tones of reflection. The village, cozy and familiar, had regained its quiet harmony, yet the memory of recent events lingered in hearts like a softly played note that refused to fade entirely. Miss Marple's attention turned to small signs of connection strengthened during the day. A letter delivered in person rather than left aside, a forgotten trinket returned, and children's drawings pinned to a notice board for neighbours to admire. Each act, seemingly minor, reflected an understanding born from insight and shared experience. The villagers, guided by the unfolding of the mystery and gentle revelations, had found renewed appreciation for one another, for the quiet patience required to navigate relationships, and for the simple joy of community. From her perch by the window, Miss Marple watched as a few late wanderers made their way home, the snow muffling footsteps and lending a gentle rhythm to their movements. Smoke curled from chimneys, blending with the fading light to create a soft haze above rooftops. Even as the day ended, the village seemed alive with the warmth of subtle bonds strengthened, moments of kindness exchanged, and quiet understanding shared. Each resident carried within them the gentle reminder that secrets, when met with patience and observation, could transform into lessons of compassion and human connection. With a final glance around the inn, Miss Marple allowed herself a small smile. The village's charm, its warmth, and the gentle rhythm of everyday life had been preserved, even as mysteries revealed themselves and resolutions unfolded. She reflected on the importance of listening, noticing, and responding with care, a reminder that even in the simplest gestures lay the power to heal, illuminate, and connect. The last of the carolers' voices drifted softly through the frosty air, mingling with the faint crunch of snow beneath departing boots. Miss Marple turned to her own quiet evening, appreciating the gentle peace that had settled over St. Mary Mead. As she prepared to retreat to the comfort of her cottage, she carried with her the knowledge that even the smallest acts of observation, kindness, and courage had transformed the day, leaving hearts quietly warmed and minds gently illuminated. The village, at rest beneath the snow, seemed to sigh in satisfaction, a gentle hush enveloping the streets as night embraced every rooftop, every lantern, and every resolved heart.